Hey y'all, welcome and welcome back. So I'm very excited to be able to say that today we are going to be doing another custom doll video. This time we're going to be looking at the making of the yellow honeybee fairy. So if you haven't seen this series before on my channel, I'm making a rainbow of fairy dolls that is each obviously themed to a color, but then also themed to an item in nature that corresponds to that color. So for example, the red fairy was the red berry fairy because a lot of berries in nature are red, and today the yellow fairy is also the kind of honeybee honeycomb fairy, kind of a bit broader, but yeah, just like honeybees and yellow and honeycombs and yellow, it all makes sense. In the interest of full disclosure, I actually am filming this intro after I've already completed the doll instead of before completing the doll, because this one was a particularly wild ride. There are some things that I'm going to explain in the course of the footage that you get to see, but I wanted to talk about the big thing at the beginning here so I didn't have to explain it several times, if that makes sense. Big problem with this one was that in the middle of making this doll, I got diagnosed with carpal tunnel, and it has been a really, really unpleasant experience. So for several weeks, I was unable completely to work on this doll, and then even when I was able to work on her again, my hands still are not at all in 100% good condition. So it was a lot slower a process. So that took a lot longer, and then also I had to kind of change the way that I do some things in order to put less stress on my hands. So this one was just a lot more stressful than normal, and I felt like if I used the footage of me introducing this doll before I finished her, it just wouldn't be really a complete introduction. So yeah, that's the actual complete introduction here, is that this is going to be the yellow honeycomb fairy, and this one's going to be a little bit more of a disaster than normal, but I hope it's still enjoyable. I also want to do an extra disclaimer. I have the one at the beginning of the video that's written that's please be careful doing this and only use these techniques if you're an adult, but I wanted to give a verbal disclaimer as well, especially with this doll. A lot of the techniques that I tried for the first time with her are a little bit more of a safety risk if you are not being careful with how you do them. So please don't try to do any of this if you are not an adult. And even if you are an adult, please do be careful if you want to replicate anything that I do here today. So I know that's a long intro. Sorry. I think this video is also going to be a really long one because I have so much footage. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into the making of the yellow honeycomb fairy. For the yellow fairy, I will actually be using two dolls as a base. I wanted to use this Claudia Wolf doll for her body because she has a slightly taller mold and also a good skin tone. However, she has an open-mouthed smile molded on. It's very cute, but just not what I have in mind for the yellow fairy. For her head, I'll be using Kala Mary's, so we just have to do a bit of swapping to start. I remove both heads by heating up the vinyl around the neck and popping them off. I then put Claudia's head and Kala's body off to the side. They won't be used in this project, but I'm sure I will use them at some point. Then it's time to go ahead and remove the hair for the head I actually intend to use. I start by just using scissors to cut as close to the head as possible. Once I've cut all the hair I can get to from the outside, it's time to take some tweezers and pliers and go in through the neck hole to remove the rest. The glue makes this process very gross, but it's also super satisfying. I scrape and pull the plugs from the inside, and eventually we end up with a perfectly bald head. During this process, a couple of her plugs tore a little bit. Thankfully, it's not too bad, and I can get away without having to sew her head back together. I also found this number carved into the side of her head. I didn't do this, and I bought this doll off the shelf, so it wasn't like a previous owner did this. It doesn't matter, but I've never seen this before, so it was just an interesting thing to find. After using 100% pure acetone to remove her face makeup and the paint from her scalp, we have a nice blank canvas to work with. However, her head and her body do not match at all when it comes to skin tone, so I'm going to need to fix that. This is where things started to go wrong. I began with using pastels to recolor the head. I've seen other doll customizers do this, admittedly with better quality products, as using pastels leads to a less streaky finish than recoloring large areas with paint. It's a slow process, one that requires lots of layers. I would build up as much pastel as I thought I could, then spray the head with MSC to seal that layer in. I'm obligated to mention here that I sprayed outside with proper protective gear. But every time I did so, I effectively erased my progress. I don't know if it was something about the air quality or humidity in my area that caused the MSC to dry weird, or if it had something to do with my pastels not combining well with the spray. But each time I sprayed, the skin tone got significantly darker and also more purple again. Still, I wasn't that deterred. I just figured I would move on to a different medium to finish recoloring the head. What you'll see me using in this clip is makeup. I believe this is a concealer, but I had bought it to use as a liquid contour. I didn't like the way it worked on my face, and I thought of it when doing this project because I realized it was a very similar color to what I wanted the yellow fairy's skin tone to be. I thought I was so clever, but before I can talk any more about this, I need to say, don't use this. Don't be like me. At first it seemed like it was actually going really well. The color matched pretty perfectly to what I wanted it to be, and it was applying just fine on the vinyl head. I don't know, again, whether the weather affected the sealing process, or whether I just shouldn't have been trying to use makeup as paint, but regardless of how good this looked at first, I tried several times to use MSC to seal it, and it just kept getting worse. You'll see clips of this later on, but I wanted to say right off the bat that this was a bad idea. I don't want anyone to only watch the video this far and decide to try using makeup only to have a bad experience. So I'll elaborate more on this and show you some videos and photos of the damage later, but in general, don't do this. Of course, at the time, I had no idea that I had made a critical mistake. So once I had the head roughly color matched to the body, I went ahead and made some aperture wires for the ears. I knew at some point I was going to have to attach the head and body, so I wanted to use wire as a base for the ears to try to make them as sturdy as possible. I poked some holes into the head where I want the wires to be inserted with an awl. It takes a couple of tries, but I get there in the end. I then twist them inside and out to secure and strengthen them. This is what it looks like when both sides are done. Next, it's time to bust out the epoxy sculpt. This will be one of 2 times I do a round of epoxy for this project. I mix equal parts of A and B and get to work sculpting. I start out by adding a bit of bulk onto her hips. I want her hips and thighs to be a little bit bigger than the doll comes with. I also have a container of water that I'm using to help me smooth the epoxy out as much as possible. After I'm done making adjustments to her hips and thighs, I also sculpt the ears. I want my yellow fairy to have stretched ears, so I add an extra thin piece of epoxy so that there is a decent amount of space that I can fill with jewelry later. I let the epoxy harden overnight, and then we can move on to the next stage. I went ahead and sanded the legs down off camera. I also made an attempt to sand off the copyright markings on her lower back. You'll see I hold up some makeup again, as I also used it to color the legs and ears. The ears, possibly because they are connected to her head, don't end up perfect, but thankfully the legs have less of an issue than her head. Once I have the body mods recolored and sealed, it's time to go immediately back to the epoxy. This time I will be sculpting honeycombs all over her body. I'm looking closely at my sketch to try to keep the placement appealing. To get the shape right, I first put a blob of epoxy approximately where I want it to go on the doll's body. Then I take an Allen wrench and press into the blob, leaving a hollow in the shape of a hexagon. Afterwards, I take my X-Acto knife and cut away the excess epoxy to get the edges as crisp as I can. Even just this tiny patch of 2 honeycombs was very tedious to get done. Now I just have to do the rest of the body. I forgot to say this at the beginning of the video, but from here on out I do need to put a trypophobia warning. If you don't like small clusters of holes, I appreciate you wanting to watch, but the rest of the video is going to be full of things that might trigger that phobia, so please be warned going in. This is what the yellow fairy looks like once I sculpt the honeycomb all around her body. I've said before in my previous custom doll videos that I am not a sculptor. It's definitely an art form that I'm unfamiliar with, so doing something this complicated was very challenging. If you look closely, it's not the neatest job, but I think given the limited experience I have, it turned out pretty good. All it needs is some acrylic paint. So everything prior to now in the video was something I accomplished before I got carpal tunnel. Going forward, you're going to see that I didn't film as much. I tried to film as much as I felt was possible, but everything was 10 times more complicated than normal with my hands not functioning well, so adding a camera on top of that didn't always pan out. I am sorry, I really didn't want to disappoint you guys, so I did the best I could. Here you can see I've just laid out a layer of yellow paint for the honeycomb. It probably doesn't look very exciting right now, but the next step is going to change that. To add some pizzazz, I'm going to be using UV resin to create honey to fill the honeycombs. This first picture is all of the different supplies I used to color the resin. Once I have a nice mix of color and glitter, this is the resin I will be working with. In the past, I've used a 2-part resin, but that wasn't going to work for this doll. Two-part resin cures over time after being mixed, so it's good for flat surfaces. But this doll and all of her honeycombs are definitely not a flat surface. If I wanted to color the honeycombs on her chest, I would then have to wait hours for that resin to cure to be able to move to her back. That would mean I was mixing and remixing resins several times to get all of the different parts and curves, which would not only be irritating, but also not at all time effective. So instead, I'm using UV resin. This type of resin cures under UV light, so you can either use natural sunlight or a UV lamp to cure it. I have a cheap UV lamp for doing my nails. It's not very strong, but it will do the job. Let's go ahead and switch gears for a second. We've been working a lot on the doll's body, but that means that her head has been a little bit neglected. For the yellow fairy, I wanted to use yarn for her reroot. My concept art of her was meant to have locks. I don't know if the yarn that I chose is quite reminiscent of locks, or maybe if it's closer to a twist or a braid of some sort, but the whole point was that I wanted her to have a protective hairstyle, and this was the best yarn that I could find for that job. So I went ahead and cut pieces of it double the length that I want her hair to be, so that once it's rooted, it will be the proper length. I brought out the awl again for this reroot in case I needed to poke larger holes into the doll's head to get the yarn to fit, but amazingly I was able to reroot it exactly like I have done in the past with nylon doll hair. I just hook a piece of yarn onto my reroot tool and plug it into the doll's head. You might be able to see in this clip a bit of the problems I foreshadowed earlier with her paint on her head. Before I even started rerooting, the color was already chipping off and also puckering, especially on her chin and forehead. It may have been smarter to correct that before working on her hair, but honestly I was so frustrated with it that I knew it would be a better idea to move on and come back to the problem once I had a clearer head. You can also see here that I gave her resin plugs to match her honeycomb. Believe it or not, this is actually her after the reroot. Because the yarn is so thick, I'll be going with a slightly different hairstyle than I originally planned. I rerooted the perimeter of the head aside from a small portion at the back that I'm going to turn into an undercut. Because of the scale of the head versus the thickness of the yarn, I'm going to leave the whole middle portion of her head bald. Once I pull the hair into a ponytail, it will look like it's fully rooted. If I actually rooted it all, it would be way too thick. I'm sure you can also see in this clip the purple poking through the brown of her face. Because I was constantly handling the head to give her hair, more of the paint flaked off. So now there's just a bit more to fix than before. This is her right before I started working on the face up. I did manage to even out her skin with some actual paint, but at this point I realized at least part of the problem was definitely my sealant. MSC can be finicky about the environment it's sprayed in, and I guess the weather around me was just not favorable. MSC is meant to be matte, but you can definitely see that the face is a little bit shiny. It's also not the most obvious in this clip, but she does have noticeable marks where you can see flecks of sealant that dried more or less matte, kind of like sealant freckles. Still, given what I had to work with, this was the best base that I could get myself. I did end up doing the whole face-up off camera, so instead of face-up footage, you guys get a quick before and after. Here's the before, and here's the after. I have to say, given the less than stellar circumstances I had to work with, I'm pretty impressed with myself for this face. Because of everything going on with her base, I ended up doing this entire repaint with paint. I did try to use watercolor pencils like normal, but they just did pretty much nothing. This is my first time doing a paint-only face-up, and I was surprised by how much I liked the process. I did add a honeycomb pattern to her forehead. Despite my best efforts, her forehead definitely had the worst issue when it came to puckering and discoloring, so I added the honeycomb to camouflage that. I actually think it works very well with her face and the rest of the doll though, so I guess that ended up being a happy consequence. So, with the nightmare that was the process of getting her face to look this good over with, we can go ahead and finish her hairstyle. To give the yellow fairy an undercut, I need to create some flocking. You can buy flocking powder for a cleaner look, but I have so much excess yarn, so I would rather use that. I take it and cut it into tiny, tiny little pieces until I have a cute pile of fluff. Then I take some Mod Podge and cover the area on the doll's head that I want to apply the flocking to with it. I'm using a pretty thick layer to make sure that no vinyl from the head is showing through. Then I just grab a pinch of the yarn fluff and press it into the glue. I repeat this until the whole area is covered with flocking, then leave it to dry. After a second round of gluing flocking down and a bit of cleanup, this is how she turned out. With her head finally completed, it's time to reattach it to the body. This process typically doesn't go super well for me, so I wanted to optimize my chances of not breaking anything in the process. I went ahead and cut down some pieces of her neck pegs so that it wouldn't be so hard to get back into the neck hole. Despite that effort, and in true Oliver fashion, her ears did still partially pop off when I put her head back on. I would love some tips from you guys on how to fix this. I've asked before, and I really am taking my time and being careful, and I have armature wires in the ears now to make them stronger. And yet they still pop off. On the bright side, it's nothing some glue won't fix. That means the only thing left to do is make the yellow fairy some wings. I'm going to be using wire and some nail art film to create them. First, I have to make a frame with the wire. I'm just doing a simple oval shape for her wings, so it's nothing fancy. I'll need 4 pieces in total, 2 on each side. Once I get the first one done and I make sure it's proportional to the doll, the rest is easy. After all of the wire frames are made, it's time to choose some film. This is so fun and tricky because the color of the film depends on the light shining through it and the color of the items behind it. Do you think I made the right choice in the end? To turn the wire and film into proper wings, I'm going to be ironing them together. Please ignore my not ironing board. I honestly just don't have a real one. But, more importantly, to iron these together, I sandwich the wire in between the film so that it's completely covered. I then covered that with parchment paper and iron it down. I flip it over to do the same to the other side, and then repeat the process for each wing. This is what they look like when they're all ironed. To get rid of the excess film around the edges, I very, very carefully melt it down over a candle flame. I did accidentally melt a hole into one wing, and instead of fighting it, I just melted a hole in roughly the same spot on the corresponding wing on the other side. Then it's just a matter of drilling a couple holes into the doll's back, and then gluing the wings in. That means we are finally done, and I can introduce you to Althea, the yellow honeycomb fairy. This was definitely my longest custom doll so far, and for a lot of reasons was the most challenging. I think I say that every time, so maybe I'll get lucky with the next one and it will actually not be this hard. If I look at her objectively, Althea does have a lot of problems. I mean, you can see in these photos that in natural light, her face and body don't match exactly. But I still think that she looks really beautiful, and she was such a labor of love that I'm really happy with her, regardless of how awful the process of creating her was at times. I said this in the beginning, but I'm really proud that I managed to complete some of the most difficult tasks when it comes to doll making when my hands were not doing great. And I'm also really proud that even though Althea was one struggle after another, I never gave up. So I'm definitely ending on a positive note. As always, I would love to hear what you guys think of Althea. If you enjoyed this video, it would mean a lot if you could give it a like. I know my custom doll videos aren't the most popular videos I make, but they are some of my favorites, so it means a lot to see you guys enjoying them. If you want to see the rest of my Rainbow Fairy series, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the green one coming up next. And I do have my Instagram and Ko-fi linked in the description if you want to support me on other platforms. In any case, thank you all for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day or your night or whatever it might be, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye guys, and happy holidays!